In our last section for the course, we'll talk a little bit about bioterrorism. So first we have to define terrorism. What is terrorism? Well, it's the use of threats or violence to intimidate and affect change. Most often, the type of change we're talking about is some sort of political change. Well, why do people then become terrorists? There are a number of different reasons. They feel disenfranchised or oppressed. Perhaps they feel marginalized. But often what we see is that they have a distorted perspective of reality. So they take perhaps a feeling of maybe being discriminated against or not belonging, and they just make it so much bigger than it really is. And specific motivations for terrorism, are the same that they've been throughout history. Things like race. People, for whatever reason, sometimes don't like people who are different races from them. And they think not only are those people not as good, there are some people who think that people of a different race aren't actually even people. So racism can be a huge motivator for terrorism. People have fought wars for millennia over religion. Everyone's religion is the correct way to heaven and the correct way to live. But when you have thousands of religions, there's literally no way that they could all be correct. So people get very passionate about their religion and can use that as motivation for terrorism. People who have differing political views. Even in this country, we see a lot of antagonism between people who have more liberal views and people who have more conservative views. So those types of political views, the types of laws people want to see passed in a country can motivate some level of terrorism. Nationalism is another big one. We see this happen with like Russia and the Ukraine and Crimea. People who historically have been oppressed in smaller nations by larger nations can act out in ways that are considered terrorism against some of these larger nations. And there have been a number of different acts of terrorism in the US and against the US. This is just a handful. There have been assassinations of 4 presidents and various other politicians, numerous civil rights leaders, abortion providers, reporters. There have been bombings on Wall Street, the World Trade Center, the Olympic Village, Oklahoma City, the Boston Marathon, hijacking and plane crashes. The Lockerbie bombing in Scotland was actually a plane full of Americans. September 11th, the shoe bomber, the Austin IRS building. The shootings, there's no way I could list all of the terroristic shootings that happened in this country, but the Beltway Sniper, Fort Hood, the Wisconsin Sikh Temple, the Charleston Church, and so many more. So terrorism is not something that is, it happens over there, but it doesn't happen here. It happens here, and it happens here all the time. Now, what specifically do I mean when I say bioterrorism? When I say bioterrorism, I mean the use of a biological agent like bacteria, viruses, or toxins to cause illness or death in people, animals, or plants. And that would be, again, for the purpose of affecting some kind of change. The biological agents can be naturally occurring, or they can be man-modified. One of the, most attractive things about bioterrorism, if you're a terrorist, not for the rest of us, the potential for widespread fear and panic without any actual damage. And we'll see some cases of bioterrorism in the US and how they caused significant panic. But in terms of the number of people injured or killed versus things like a bombing or a shooting, the differences are pretty striking. Biological agents can be difficult to detect. We just saw in the previous section how it can be challenging to identify the cause of a disease. So it can be really difficult to figure out what the agent is. And sometimes they might incubate for a long period of time. And so a person may not get the most immediate results. So why is biowarfare not more common? Well, it can be very difficult to control. You can, for the most part, control a bomb. You can control a gun. You can target it at a very specific group of people if that's what you want to do. But once you've released a biological agent, there's no putting it back in the bottle, basically. So difficult to control, difficult to contain. There has been a long history of bioterrorism throughout any kind of warfare. In the Eastern Mediterranean, they would send victims of tularemia into enemy territory to spread disease. The ancient Greeks and Romans would poison water supplies. They would put venom and feces on arrow tips to cause infection or envenomation. During the Middle Ages, they would take plague corpses or fomites, like blankets, clothing that had been in contact with plague victims, and they would use catapults to fling them over into walled cities. You could place bodies in the water supply to contaminate the water supply. They even mixed people's wine with blood from leprosy patients. In the US, the British and Spanish colonists would give smallpox exposed materials to the Native Americans because the Native Americans had never seen smallpox before. So it would really run through the population and kill a lot of people. During the Civil War, there were accounts of invading forces slaughtering animals and then dumping the rotting carcasses in water wells. Dr. Luke Blackburn, who became Kentucky's governor, was a Confederate soldier who tried to infect Union troops by giving them clothing exposed to smallpox and yellow fever. During World War I, Germans tried to give anthrax to Russian horses. They tried to infect Allied livestock with a horse infection called glanders, which would kill the horses. Horses were really important in combat. This is before we had a lot of vehicles, so the way that troops could move most quickly was on horses. And Germans living in the US would assist with this. So they would infect the horses with these pathogens in the US. This is a horse that's sick with glanders. During World War II, the UK established a research program to study potential bioweapons like tularemia, anthrax, an infection called brucella, which can cause glanders, and also botulinum toxin. The US had a program that they developed in 1942. It was led by George Merck. You might recognize the name Merck Pharmaceuticals. The Japanese also did their own bioterrorism research. They tended to do human experimentation. They would do things like drop plague-infected fleas in China. They contaminated rivers near the Soviets with typhoid. And they even had a plan that was called Operation Cherry Blossoms at Night, where they were going to drop plague in Southern California. But they didn't make it over here to do that. Post-World War II, during the Cold War, the UK, the US, the USSR, Japan either developed a bioweapons program or improved their bioweapons program. The UK continued their previous work and added things like plague, cowpox, and various encephalitis-causing infections. The US worked on vectors like ticks, fleas, and mosquitoes. They also investigated plant pathogens because plants are important as a source of food. So if you could remove an enemy's food source, you could starve them out. And there was something called Operation Whitecoat, where conscientious objectors who didn't want to be drafted and go into combat could volunteer to be tested for some of these types of things. So often they were religious groups, tended to be, for this particular operation, a lot of Seventh-day Adventists. So they were drafted, they had to join the military, but they didn't want to fight because it was against their religion. So instead they volunteered for the bioweapons program. But we now have a Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention. So it's a treaty that basically bans, you can read it all here, but the development, stockpiling, acquisition, retention, and production of biological agents and toxins, weapons, equipment, and delivery vehicles designed to use those biological agents during combat. There were 14 countries who didn't agree. They did not sign the Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention. There were a number of countries who signed it and probably didn't mean it. For example, the USSR continued their program. They had an accidental release of smallpox in 1971. In Rhodesia, they contaminated their food and water supplies with anthrax and cholera. And Iraq later admitted to producing 19 liters of botulinum toxin, 10,000 of which were loaded onto weapons, which was 3 times the amount needed to kill all humans on the planet. So, sure, there's a treaty. Look, even North Korea signed it. Do we trust them? Not so much. So these are the countries that we now all currently believe have the capability or have a program available to do some sort of bioterrorism. So Canada, the US, UK, Germany, France, Algeria, Libya, Egypt, South Africa, Israel, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Pakistan, India, China, Russia, North Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. So in the US, what we say is that we no longer have a bioweapons development group. Instead, we have a defensive program. So there are still plenty of labs that study all of these potential bioweapons, but we say we study it from the angle of defense instead of using them as a weapon.